When will I be fluent? That is a question that I know so many of us tie ourselves in knots about. The classic, what does it mean to be fluent, that normally then leads on to, when do I have the right to say I'm fluent? And if you're struggling to answer either of those questions, well, you are in very good company. The problem is, fluency is one of those words where we all kind of know what it means, but not really. We know that the answer is sort of about whether you can speak at a natural speed, whether you and the person that you're speaking to can understand each other easily, whether the conversation flows well, and whether you make a lot of mistakes. We also know that it's got something to do with the cultural awareness of the language. So it includes things like, do you understand how the language needs to change in certain settings? Maybe when you're speaking to older people versus younger people, or whether you're using the language in the workplace versus at home. Do you have the ability to really choose your words for their intended purpose when you're talking to inform versus talking to persuade versus talking to comfort? But then it gets a bit messy. And I think we can all think of all sorts of cases where people could certainly be considered an authority in their language, but there's a question mark over whether they're fluent. For example, a child brought up in a bilingual home where they speak but never write in their native language. Once they get to their front door, their entire world is in this other language, but they have no idea about the spelling rules and they don't know any of the silent grammar in this language. So is that child fluent? And what about the French literature professor, world leading in their field, who can read and translate 17th century novels with incredible skill? But when they speak in stilted, archaic French and they sound like a textbook. Is there fluency there? And what about the person who chats away quite happily, understands everything that's being said around them, can watch TV without subtitles, follow group conversations in a crowded and noisy room, no problem at all. But when they speak, they say everything in the present tense, or they get grammatical genders mixed up all the time. Are they fluent? And what about the fact that in our native language, we still get tongue-tied, we still need to use a dictionary or a spell checker sometimes, and we still have to do edit after edit to get our tone right in a job application or a public speaking engagement? And what about the fact that we can meet other native speakers of our language, and if they're from a different place to us, if they have a particularly strong regional accent that we're not used to, communication between us can be pretty tough. In that case, which one of us stopped being fluent? So I think one thing is very clear, and that's that as ambitions go, fluency isn't a great one. And once we start down the road of whether we're fluent, it can let imposter syndrome and the inner critic run the show. It opens up all these questions of worthiness and am I being arrogant, and what if someone proves me wrong just by being better than me? And a lot of language learners also find that their own benchmark for calling themselves fluent is a lot higher than they hold for other people. Because with other people, they're judging what they can hear, whereas for themselves, they're also judging all the stuff going on in their heads, all the things they wanted to say but couldn't. It's that same story about judging your behind the scenes with everybody else's highlight reel. So here is what I would recommend. We have to set the word fluent to one side and forget about it as a benchmark for how good we want to be. We have to take the word fluent and throw it in a big skip that we're going to call the bin of aspirational but woolly terms where it belongs, and it is going to sit alongside its friends happy, rich, successful and beautiful, which are all lovely words that make you feel all tingly and glowy, and they look like ambitions and they look great on posters. But they lure you into the same trap because there is no universal standard on when you have reached them. With all of those words, you change the place, you change the situation, you change the requirements, and they look different. So let's take the word successful. Imagine you go into an investment bank and you ask them, when can I call myself successful? And now imagine you do the same for a secondary school, and a national lacrosse league, and a publishing house, and a modelling agency. The answers each time are so different because they are solely based on what those places need. They're based on getting to the top of 5 completely different ladders. And it's exactly the same for fluency. The definition of fluency changes every time the situation changes because it matches the requirement for that particular situation. Conversational fluency means you can make friends in the language and you won't struggle with everyday chit-chat. And in the world of work, the kind of fluency required to be a tour guide will be so different than what you're going to need to write business emails, which will be different again from negotiating complex business deals. And so when you're sitting at home without all those constraints, it is impossible to make that judgment call. And the other issue is none of those words are permanent states. If you ask someone if they're successful when they've just come out of an awards ceremony, you might get a very different response than if you ask them when they're working overtime for a really difficult client. Ask someone if they feel beautiful on a day when they're all dressed up, and they'll be far more likely to say yes than when they're overtired and generally down on life. And the same goes for fluency. It's normal to feel more fluent on some days than others. Your language performance really does vary when you're tired or stressed or distracted, and some days you don't know why, but the words just come easier than others. And of course, we also feel more fluent when we've been chatting well inside our comfort zone with people that we like and trust. So in a lot of ways, fluency is just shorthand for good enough. So what if we stopped asking, am I fluent yet? Or worrying that we said we were fluent, but maybe we're not, and we focused on things that we can actually do to showcase our skills. Tangible things that show us our progress, that we can also tell other people when they ask, but most importantly, that we can tell ourselves. It might be reading a book in the language, either going up a ladder of graded readers or just choosing titles that we like. It might be posting on social media in the language, even if it's just one sentence or one quote at a time. It might be something like filling in a language journal or writing short stories or blog posts. And it might be attending church services or choirs or dance classes in that language, in person if they're available, but if not, there are so many online courses and communities and meetups that you could be a part of. It's hard to say confidently that we're fluent, and the vagueness of the word means that imposter syndrome can show up at any time. But we can say, beyond all doubt, that, for example, we read books in the language. We can say that we have conversations in the language every day or every week. All those little things, everything that we do, that we consume, and that we create in our language kind of act like a portfolio that can speak for us. So we never have to overthink, but is it fair to say that I'm fluent? Wherever you are in your language right now, you are good enough. So don't get caught up in vague goals that can make you doubt yourself, because they're going to distract you. Focus on what you can do. Focus on what you can create. And focus on really cultivating the skills you have to make connections, to express yourself, and to be a whole person in your language. Because that's what fluency is for anyway. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you on Monday.